Hello friends, in this video we are going to discover the top 10 states with the largest African American populations. The proportion of the African American population in the U.S. states have significantly varied since the days of institutionalized slavery and the Civil War. The changes over the years have largely been dictated by movements in search of better economic opportunities. While the African Americans have made significant achievements in several fields, they still trail other groups of people in the country in terms of wealth and education. Kindly make sure to hit the subscribe button and press the bell icon before we start this video about the 10 states with the largest African American populations. Now let's dig deeper into each of the top 10 states with the largest African American populations. Number 10. Virginia. The African American population in Virginia is around 1,800,436, accounting for 20.67% of the state's total population and approximate 4% of the nation's African American population. African Americans have lived in the state since 1619, when a Dutch ship sold about 20 African slaves here. As black slavery took root in Virginia after 1680, the numbers of African Americans increased. By 1704, 10,000 slaves were living in Virginia. Slavery was officially abolished in 1865, but black civil rights remained largely ignored for many years thereafter. Despite the challenges, Virginia produced many notable black personalities. Arthur Ashe was the first African American man to win a tennis Grand Slam, the Wimbledon and the US Open. Willie Lanier became the first African American to play middle linebacker for Kansas City Chiefs. Virginia also produced the civil rights leaders James Farmer and Irene Morgan. Number 9. Delaware. Delaware's African American population is around 230,353, which accounts for 21.4% of the state's total population and 0.5% of the nation's African American population. The first ever documented African American in Delaware, which was then New Sweden, was a West Indies slave named Antony Swart. The first perpetrators of black slavery in Delaware were the Dutch, who had settled there in 1631. In 1776, the state Senate made a declaration against slavery in the first Constitution. 1787 slave masters were fined £20, and many slaves freed. Nonetheless, Delaware was one of the last states in the nation to allow slavery to remain. Prominent African Americans from Delaware include desegregation activist Lewis Redding, Herman M. Holloway Sr., the first African American elected to the state Senate, and Dr. Eugene McGowan, the first African American psychologist in the state's public school system. Unemployment in Delaware among African Americans stands at 12%. Graduation rates for African Americans in Delaware were the lowest in last decade among all other races. Furthermore, a report released by the Center for Community Service and Research at the University of Delaware stated that African Americans in the state are twice more likely to live in poverty than whites living there. Number 8. North Carolina. There are 2,392,628 African Americans in North Carolina, accounting for 22.09% of the state's total population and 5.3% of the nation's African American population. Abolitionists Harriet Jacobs and Thomas H. Jones were born here, as was Dr. Charlotte Hawkins Brown, an educator. In 1902, Dr. Hawkins founded the Palmer Memorial Institute that educated 2,000 African American students throughout its 70-year-long history, according to the North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources. Still, today graduation rates for African Americans are the second lowest among races in the state after Hispanics, according to a report by the National Center for Education Statistics. Unemployment is also a problem in the state and, according to a U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics report, the rate of African American unemployment currently stands at 10.3%, which is almost double the entire nation's average of 5.3%. In the modern day, Henry Fry made history as the first African American Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court in 1983. The state is also the birthplace of boxers Sugar Ray Leonard and Floyd Patterson, musicians Max Roach, Benny King, and Nina Simone, attorney Loretta Lynch, and dancer Harold Nicholas. Number 7. Alabama. Alabama's African American population is 1,349,311, and it accounts for 26.46% of the state's population and 3.2% of the nation's African-American population according to the 2010 census. Alabama is steeped in black history. In early 1965, protesters led by Martin Luther King Jr., who were yearning for African Americans receiving the right to vote and other basic civil liberties, were met with violent resistance by state and local authorities while marching from Selma to the state capital of Montgomery. Their protests were part of what triggered the landmark Voting Rights Act to be passed. In the field of education, African Americans in Alabama lag behind other groups. According to a National Center for Education Statistics report, at 67% of African Americans had the lowest rate of public high school graduation compared to all other races. Nonetheless, the state is a bastion of black achievements, as former U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, sportsman Carl Lewis, Jesse Owens, Terrell Owens, Charles Barkley, Ozzie Smith, Evander Holyfield, Willie Mays, and Joe Louis, activists Rosa Parks and Richard C. Boone, and musician Nat King Cole are all from Alabama. Still, Alabama grapples with high unemployment rates among its African American populace. In the second quarter of recent year, unemployment among African Americans stood at 10.9%, more than double the white unemployment rates in the state. Number 6. South Carolina. South Carolina's African American population is 1,423,684. Accounting for 26.49% of the state's population and 3.3% of the U.S. African American population. The state is known for the Stono Rebellion of September 9, 1739, which was the largest slave uprising in the colonies before the American Revolution. That day, 20 black slaves met secretly near the Stono River to plan an escape. Later, they went into the local Hutchison store, where they killed 2 storekeepers and stole the guns and powder they then used to battle against their slave owners, according to America's Library. In the modern day, Tim Scott in 2014 became the first African American Republican senator from South Carolina since the post-Reconstruction period of the late 19th century. Among African Americans, unemployment is nearly 3 times more than rates among whites according to EPI. Nationally, high school graduation rates for African Americans were 69% and the lowest among racial groups, but in South Carolina, these stood at 71%, second last after Hispanics, according to the National Center for Education Statistics report. Famous black people born in South Carolina include tennis player Althea Gibson, musicians James Brown and Chubby Checker, comedian Chris Rock, activist Jesse Jackson, and many others. Number 5. Maryland. Maryland's African American population is 1,937,445, which accounts for 31.48% of the state's population and 4.4% of America's African American population. Harriet Tubman, a nurse and slave abolitionist, was born in 1820 in this state. Tubman, herself a runaway slave, led hundreds of other slaves to freedom along the escape route known as the Underground Railroad. This railroad was a secret network of safe houses where deserting slaves stayed on their northward journeys to freedom. Still, there are many challenges for African Americans living today in Maryland. Unemployment rates among them are twice those seen among whites. They are also 5.6 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than whites, according to a Common Dreams study. They are also 8 times more likely to die of HIV/AIDS complications than whites. In recent years, a subtle form of segregation has come into the education system, as schools have once again become increasingly racially and economically segregated, according to a Civil Rights Project report. Number 4. Georgia. African Americans in Georgia number around 3,499,435. They account for 31.7% of the state's population and 7.6% of the nation's African Americans. The state, which has often been dubbed as the Black Mecca, is the birth and burial place of civil rights activist Martin Luther King Jr. Georgia's African American population traces its origins to slaves brought there from West Africa between 1750 and 1810. Wealthy rice planters in Georgia relied on West African slaves to grow their rice for export. Booker T. Washington delivered his famous Atlanta Compromise speech on September 18, 1895, in Atlanta, the state capital. Poverty levels are still a problem for African Americans in the state. Number 3. Louisiana. Louisiana's African American population is 1,560,396. This accounts for 31.7% of the state's total population and 3.7% of the nation's African American population. The state is historically known for producing such notable blacks as Israel Meyer Augustine Jr., the first African American to become a district judge in 1970, and the famous jazz musician and trumpet player Louis Armstrong, who was born in a New Orleans ghetto in 1901. Louisiana ranked at 43rd in the nation in terms of black male high school graduation rates. African American poverty levels are the highest of all races in the state. Culturally, African Americans in Louisiana have a rich, long-standing tradition of oral storytelling. Number 2. Mississippi. Mississippi's African American population is 1,149,385, which is 39.21% of the state's population and 2.8% of the entire African American population, as per the U.S. Census. The state is renowned for Hiram Rhodes Revels, the first African American man to serve in the U.S. Congress in 1870. At the time of his election to Congress, African Americans had gained the right to vote following the post-Civil War Reconstruction era. However, this right was taken away from them not long thereafter. Unemployment among African Americans is still a major problem in the state. Mississippi's African American unemployment rate is the 9th highest among 24 states with measurable black populations. It is also 3 to 4 times higher than that of the white population. Number 1. District of Columbia. According to the U.S. Census, the African American population in the District of Columbia, D.C., is around 333,125. This accounts for 49.36% of the total population and 0.8% of the entire nation's black, African American, population. In recent years, the African American population in Washington has declined in a city that has long been a hub of black political movement and culture. In 1980, 70.3% of D.C.'s population was black, while from 2000 to 2010 the area's relative African American population declined by 11%. Lack of jobs, low educational access, and soaring property prices have combined to force the African American population to leave D.C. and head to other areas like Maryland and Virginia. Historically, D.C. was preferred by African Americans as it was the nation's capital, and, in 1867, they gained the right to vote there. In 1900, many opportunities for federal jobs were also extended unto them. So, which is your favorite states among the top 10 states with the largest African American populations? Well, that's all we have for you today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the content of this video, click the subscribe button so you can receive more content like this. Post your favorite places among the top 10 states with the largest African American populations in the comments below. I'd love to read them, and I'm sure others would too.